If you're visiting with us today, I'm not the normal preacher. And it won't be the first time that I've not been called normal. How'd y'all like that song? I'll tell you what, it brings back memories of Vacation Bible School, studying as a young child, Kool-Aid and cookies. And I thought today I'd try to do something. The thing is, I think we tend to pass over that scripture a little bit and kind of pass it off as a kid's tale or a kid's story, something we tell the kids at Vacation Bible School. Well, today we're going to gear this a little bit to the kids, but there's some pretty significant truths involved in that story that we're going to talk about. Now, how many kids do we have in the audience today? Okay, let's try this again. How many kids do we have in the audience today? There we go. There we go. And by the way, if you're a kid, not just young at heart, but young in body and spirit, then there's going to be a couple of questions here. And I want you to pay attention because every so often during the sermon, we're going to ask a question. And if you're paying attention, you're going to be able to answer that question, okay? All right? Now, I do have an issue with the song leader a little bit. He did not do my favorite part of that song. Because the foolish man, when he built his house on the sand, what's the end result? Splat. That was my favorite part of the song. I lived for that part of the song. And Tommy didn't do it today. But we're going to get into that. Kids, pay attention. And when you know the answer, lean over to your mom or dad and tell them the answer so that we know that you knew. And if you're a kid, but you're a little older in body, maybe lean over to your spouse or just keep it to yourself and you'll be on the honor system this morning. All right? All right, here we go. We're going to start with the first question. You ready? It's an easy one. What did the wise man build his house on? Now, come on. If you don't know this one by now, you're already way behind. All right. All right. So now the questions are going to get a little harder as we go on, but, that's the first one. So score 1 if you got that one right, okay? If you listen to the scripture reading, and it talks about, Jesus begins with, he who hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him unto a wise man. He who hears these sayings of mine and doesn't do them, I will liken him unto a foolish man. And if you look at it, he starts out, the major difference between these two men is not what they heard or what they believed, but it's the action that they took. And so initially, the problem we run into here is a problem of action or inaction. The person who hears these sayings of mine and does them is a wise man. The person who hears these sayings and doesn't is a foolish man. In James 2, James said, faith without works is dead. You might translate that based on what Jesus said in Matthew, that faith without works is foolish. It's silly. Why do you believe if you don't do the things that I've asked you to do? What's the point? So the major thing that we deal with here is action. Question number 2. Kids, have you been listening? What's the major difference between the wise man and the foolish man? Was it the message that they heard? Was it the things they believed? The major difference was the action that they took. The action that they took. Now we're going to start getting into it. I looked at a number of different things regarding wise and foolish. The term wise is used in the Bible a total of 221 times. 69 of those times are in Proverbs. And it's kind of fitting, and you'll have a similar correlation when you start talking about the term fool. It's kind of fitting that you would see that, it's clearly at least 30% or nearly 30% of the times that the word wise is used in the Bible, because Proverbs was written by who? By Solomon. Proverbs was written by Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived, God-given wisdom. And so he's probably the most qualified to make those comparisons between wise and foolish. And there's a number of discussions around what constitutes a wise man and what constitutes a foolish man. And we're going to talk about those this morning. And they're not anything earth-shattering. You're not going to go out of here saying, I learned a whole bunch of really new stuff, but I think it's good that we revisit some of the things that are pointed out in this parable of the wise man who built his house on the rock. The first one I want to talk about is a wise man will hear and increase in learning. How many of you have heard the term a lifelong learner? You probably hear this in the professional setting a lot. If you're an employer, if you've been employed in a corporate setting very often, you've probably heard this because your employer doesn't want you to not increase in wisdom, not increase in knowledge. Typically, when you come right out of college, you don't know, regardless of what you might think, you don't know everything there is to know. And you have to learn it as you go along. I think there have been studies that have said that it takes somewhere around a year after you've gotten out of college for you to actually become proficient at what you do. Because while they may teach you a lot of stuff in college, they don't teach you what you're doing in the real world. That you have to learn. And it's not just that first year, because if you want to continue to advance in your career, you have to continue to learn new things and different things. And you have to, as technology changes, you have to change with it and understand the new technologies. You have to understand new ways of dealing with people. You have to understand new regulations regarding personnel and new regulations regarding the things that you do. But a wise man is a lifelong learner. This carries over into the body of Christ. A wise Christian is a lifelong learner. You know, my dad is 80-something years old. He's been an elder. He's been a minister. He has a room full of books. He still learns things. He can't preach anymore because his memory's not quite as what it once was, but he still learns things. God gave us His Word in a nice little package right here. And if you look at some of the legal briefs and the legal documentation and the things having to do with your workplace, they're huge. God's Word is summed up in this one book. This one book. And it's more important than anything you will ever deal with at work. You need to learn it. You need to learn it. A wise man will hear and increase. Notice he said, hear. A wise man's a good listener. A good listener. I have a tendency on occasion to run off at the mouth and forget that I'm supposed to be listening. PJ's not here today, or she would attest to that. I'm sure we all do that on occasion, where we get talking, we get caught up with ourselves, and actually we're going to talk about that when we get over to the part about the fool. Because Solomon speaks to that when he talks about the fool. But a wise man will listen. A wise man will listen. And will attain wise counsel. You ever hear of a mentor or a mentee? If you've been in the corporate world very much, you've probably heard the term mentor or mentee. Let me tell you, young people, old people, whatever, I think you need to probably find one. Because there is nothing better than having I guess it's a study partner or a sounding board or someone who can provide guidance to you around spiritual matters. Maybe that's your spouse. In my case, it is. I like to talk to PJ about spiritual matters. She's my sounding board. That's one of the things I think spouses are supposed to be, is your sounding board. But you need to find someone that you can have these discussions with. Attain wise counsel. And oh, by the way, without saying, it's supposed to be someone who's somewhat wise. You don't want to take counsel from a fool. We'll deal with that in a minute. Proverbs 9:8 says, do not correct a scoffer lest he hate you. Rebuke a wise man and he will love you. A wise man takes good constructive criticism. Do you ever run into that where you have someone who just doesn't take criticism at all? They don't take, let me help you out here. And it's just, they just shut their ears. A wise man takes constructive criticism. You will not learn if you do not learn to take constructive criticism, because you cannot improve if you don't. I will tell you every time I finish a sermon or public speaking, the first person I go to is PJ. She'd probably be embarrassed if she knew I was using it. Well, she's listening. How'd I do? Because I know she'll tell me honestly. Well, I'm not sure about that wise man on the rock thing. I'm not sure that's the way you should have gone there. And I'll probably hear that. But I did. But a wise man takes constructive criticism. And if you don't learn from your own mistakes, you are doomed to repeat them. He who walks with wise men will be wise. So if I'm a wise man, who am I going to hang out with? I'm going to hang out with other wise men. I don't know. I just thought of this, in the story of the birth of Christ. It was like all the wise men showed up together because they were hanging out together. And all the shepherds showed up together because they were hanging out together. You didn't have the wise men and the shepherds show up at the same time. I don't know if that's an accident or not. But if you're a wise man, you're going to hang out with wise people. You're going to hang out with people who are going to improve you over time, who are going to increase your knowledge and increase your wisdom. You're not going to hang out with those people who are a bad influence. Young people, this is particularly important to you right now. Because as we get older, we start to figure out who we need to hang out with and who we don't. Some people haven't figured that out yet, but most of us do over time. But young people, because of the peer pressures and the things that you deal with at school, you need to figure out who you're going to hang out with. And it needs to be someone who's going to make an important difference in your life and not drag you down. And we'll talk about that in the fool section as well. And then finally, a wise son heeds his father's instruction. Pay attention to the lessons of your fathers and your parents and your grandparents. A wise son heeds his father's instruction. I've said this before, but it's important you remember it. Your dad has been there. There is no reason for you to make the same stupid mistakes that I've made in my lifetime. And if I can share with you information that'll keep you from doing that, then you need to listen to me. Because there's a lot of stupid things you can do out there because it really sounds good at the moment. But if you can listen to your dad or to someone who's been there and they can tell you, you know, you really don't want to do that because here's how that's going to play out. A wise son heeds his father's instruction. All right. Ready for another question? You been paying attention? All right. I heard it. I heard it back there. Somebody has been. Good. Whose instruction does a wise son heed, or daughter? A wise son or daughter heeds whose instruction? Fathers. His fathers. Now you guys remember that. His fathers. Next thing we're going to talk about is the rock. We talked about the wise man, and the wise man built his house on the rock. So I think this is a very important part of this story. We tend to focus on the rock part of this, and I think justly so. The wise man built his house on the rock. You could make all sorts of correlations. Do we have any engineers, any builders in here? Well, Hampton is. And are you not proud of that, Hampton? Because you just raised your hand like that. I don't know, some of you have been to my house and it kind of sits way up on a hill. And I'm hoping that they went down and got to rock, because if not, at some point my house is going to slide down that hill. And that's what happens. Do you ever, back a few years ago on the West Coast, they were having all the tsunamis and hurricanes and stuff like that. I guess it's not a hurricane on the West Coast, is it? It's a typhoon, whatever. They were having a lot of rain. And they kept showing these pictures of the West Coast, these big, beautiful mansions setting up on these cliffs overlooking the ocean that when the weather was nice, it'd probably be a great place to live. But the news kept showing them falling off into the ocean. Not a good place to live at that point in time. That's what happens when you don't build your house on the rock. We've been given a rock, a foundation, an anchor, stability on which to build. Keith alluded in his class this morning that, we're here for a short time. This is temporary. This is all temporary. We build on a rock which is permanent and eternal, not temporary. And when we talk about the sand here in a minute, we'll talk about temporary. Actually, we're not going to talk about sand. We're just going to talk about foolish. Matthew 16:18, and I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. What was that rock? The fact that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. That's the rock that we build on. That's our permanence. The opposite of that in Ephesians 4, and I didn't put the entire 11 through 15, I put verse 14. We should no longer be children tossed to and fro and carried about. Does that sound stable to you? Tossed to and fro and carried about? That's why we build on the rock. Stability. Next question, kids, you ready? What did Jesus tell Peter that he would build his church on? I'm sure you all got it, right? You ready? It's the same thing as the wise man built his house on, the rock. Jesus told Peter that he would build his church on the rock. Jesus was a wise man. This is timely. You know, they just built this thing about just a couple of weeks ago. This is the world's largest sandcastle. They built it over in Denmark. It is it's just short of 70 feet high. If you want to convert that, that's a 7-story building. And that's a sandcastle. They used nearly 5,000 tons of sand to build this thing. It took 30 sand sculptors. That, believe it or not, there's such a thing as sand sculptors. Took 30 of them working 3 weeks to build it. Okay, now I got a question for you. For those of you who are weather aficionados, is that a good word? What's going to happen when it rains? They are going to have a 5,000-ton pile of sand. There are no questions about the sandcastle, kids. So I just want to share because I thought that was interesting that you built. And oh, by the way, this is another interesting point. You know what they put at the very tip top? You know what they put at the very tip top of this sandcastle? This is trivia. It's a replica of a coronavirus. I'm serious. I'm serious. At the very top of this sandcastle, it's a replica of the coronavirus. No accounting. Why would you work 3 weeks on something and then put a coronavirus on it? Okay, kids, here we go. You ready? Who built their house on the sand? The foolish man built their house on the sand. Good. As with the wise man, the Bible has a lot to say about foolish men. Well, shoot, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, the Bible mentions fools or fool some 196 times. 78 of those are in Proverbs. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes. Doesn't like to get advice. Why would he? Because he's smarter than the average bear, right? I don't like to know when I'm wrong because I am wise in my own eyes. Do you know people like that? They don't take instruction well. They don't take constructive criticism. They know more than anybody else out there, and they're more than happy to share that with you. They will tell you what they know because that's what they know. So a fool tends to be wise in his own eyes. A fool has no delight in understanding. That's another one. You ever get one of those folks you talk to and they know everything, but they've done absolutely no research? We seem to have a lot of that lately. I've seen people get up on national television and talk about things that they apparently have absolutely no idea about. But they're more than happy to talk in great detail about it. They've done absolutely no research. They have absolutely no insight or inside information. I like it especially. I laugh about this. I probably shouldn't. Especially on the local news. This is really good on the local news. When they're doing a local story, maybe about an accident or something along those lines, and they're interviewing somebody who just drove by. Well, what do you think about that? Oh, it's terrible. Terrible. I hear. Well, you know, if I wanted to hear, I'd have watched it on the news. Why are they interviewing you? Because you don't know any more than the next guy. A foolish man has no delight in understanding. Don't bother me with the facts. The next one goes back to kids. The next one goes back to what we talked about. Remember the wise man? Whose instruction did he heed? His father's. A foolish man despises his father's instruction. He doesn't like criticism. I'm going to do it my own way. I got to figure it out for myself. You know, in the 60s, I think they called this finding yourself. Let me go ahead and make all the mistakes that you made because that seems like a really smart thing to do. A fool despises his father's instruction. I like this one. I added this one because there's a common proverb very similar that you hear. But Proverbs 17 says, even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he is considered perception. Y'all heard the counter to this? The modern day thing? What is it? See if I've got it written down because I knew I'd forget it if I didn't. Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to open one's mouth and remove all doubt. That's what Solomon's saying here. Better to be silent and be thought a fool than to open one's mouth and remove all doubt. You ever notice those guys who seem to know the least talk the most? Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. Kids, question 6. This is a little trickier. You got to think back to early in the lesson. The way of the fool is right in whose eyes? His own eyes. His own eyes. The way of the fool is right in his own eyes. Not anybody else's. And then the rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew, and beat upon that house. You know, we all go through this. We all run into our times of the winds blew and the rain's descending, and our house takes a pretty good beating. We have examples You know, Job and Job 1 and Job 2, I don't think you could take a bigger beating than Job took in those chapters. It seems like every other verse, someone is coming up to Job and telling him a horrific story, and then he says, and I alone have survived to come tell you about it. Individual things that would cripple us by themselves come to Job in waves in a matter of hours. And I alone have survived to come tell you about it. The story of Elijah. After the episode on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal, he's running from Jezebel. At some point, he sits down under a broom tree and he says, God, just take me now. I've had it. I'm tired. I'm beat up. I'm being chased by Jezebel. She wants to kill me. I've done everything that you asked me for, and look what it's got me. Just take me now. And then finally, Paul on a number of different occasions outlines everything that he's gone through for the cause of Christ. 5 times I received 40 stripes save one. You know, just one of those times, I'm not sure, after 40 stripes, I'm not sure how I would react. I can't imagine what Paul's back looked like. 5 times, 39 stripes. And then to be beaten with rods. And then to be shipwrecked. And then to be stoned. And Paul just kind of goes down through this list. And I think, Paul, at what point do you learn? Paul's faith was founded on a rock. Paul's faith was founded on a rock. There's ultimately 2 outcomes to this story. We talked about at the first, the difference in the wise man and the foolish man was the fact that one took action, one did not. When you get down to the end of this story, there's 2 outcomes. And these outcomes apply to us today. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall because it was founded on a rock. That's the best outcome. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it. That's the other outcome. And folks, that's the only 2 outcomes that there's going to be in life. Either your house stands up to the persecution, to the trials, to the things that you have to deal with day in and day out. And by the way, they don't even come close to what Job had to deal with or what Paul had to deal with. Your little trials at this point are small by comparison. But unless you're founded on the rock, your house goes splat. We have an opportunity to help you. If you feel like your house is not founded on the rock, and maybe you've been tossed a little to and fro, the winds have been pushing you this way and pushing you that way. It's hard to find any bearing. It's been a tough life. You got to find a rock. You have got to anchor yourself to the rock. And if we can help you do that today, won't you come now as we stand and sing?